You're talking about a moment of fear. You're talking about a moment informing me that I'm wanted for something that I have no idea took place in the first place. And so the first emotion was like shock and fear and like, what is this and where is it coming from? And how do I find safety?
In January 1998, J.J. Velazquez was arrested for the murder of Albert Ward, a man J.J. had never met, a retired NYPD officer who was allegedly running an illegal numbers ring in Harlem, near where J.J. lived.
Start seeking counsel, trying to figure out what's going on. We were advised that you're not to turn yourself into the police until you have counsel, specifically because of what they're accusing you of. They're not accusing me of a regular crime. I'm being accused of taking a police officer's life. It was a lot of fear until I was finally able to go to the precinct. And my attorneys were like, they don't have a warrant for your arrest, go home. And I'm like, do you realize that my home is locked with a police lock, that they knocked down the door to my apartment? Like, I can't go home. We need to resolve this situation. And they said, well, they want you to volunteer for a lineup. And I told them, well, then I'm volunteering for a lineup. I didn't do this. I'm not worried about that. And they're like, well, if you get selected in that lineup, you're going to jail. And I said, and if I don't get selected in that lineup, what happens? He says, you go home. He says, but you can go home right now.
JJ was the son of a New York City police officer who had died just 10 months before the murder of Albert Ward. JJ says not having his father to talk to led to him making a fateful decision.
So I volunteered for the lineup. And unfortunately, what I can tell you unequivocally is that was the worst choice I ever made in my life. Eventually, somebody selects me in the lineup. And I realize, okay, I'm not going home. This is not going to play out the way I thought it would. I end up staying in this cell or cage for several hours, and then I'm brought into a central booking. I felt like I had out-of-body experiences, seeing myself. What really, I think, destroyed my spirit, and I don't know how I came back from it, was when they told me that I would be facing the death penalty. Like, that really just took it all out of me. Like, how is it that I didn't even do anything to be here? Like, I wasn't at the wrong place at the wrong time. I was at the right place at the right time. When they told me what time this occurred, I realized quickly I was home. I was taking care of my son. I had my newborn in the house as well. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was being a father. I was being a son. And then I was kidnapped. All that time, I spent 18 months on Rikers Island. Rikers Island is like a death zone. It's crazy. It's madness. And I had to endure 18 months of that and go to a trial and then have people get on a stand and just say all kinds of stories that may have been true, but they're not true about me.
The case against JJ was thin, as there was no physical evidence nor DNA pinning him to the crime scene. Even the initial descriptions of a suspect did not match JJ.
There were no other witnesses that could come forward and say, like, nah, that the person that picked him out in the lineup, they got it wrong.
Well, actually 9 witnesses. One of them said they put their head down, couldn't see anything. So there were 8 eyewitnesses who stated unequivocally that 2 black men, 1 light skin and 1 dark skin, came in there and committed the crime. The problem that we're having here is that I don't fit that description. What race I am, they always put Hispanic. But I was accused of being a black man.
With dreads.
With dreads. And just seeing it all. There was travesties that took place in front of my eyes. A witness picked out juror number 6 and identified that person as the gunman in the courtroom. How is it that I was found guilty? How is it that juror number 6 said guilty, knowing that he was selected by a witness, and had that been in a precinct, that he would be sitting in my seat? I remember the day that the verdict came down. It was a real weird moment because I was acquitted of murder 1, which would have gotten me natural life. We had already gone past the death penalty phase, so I was not looking at the death penalty phase. But then they found me guilty of murder 2 and the lesser included offenses. And so initially with the acquittal of murder 1, I'm thinking I'm a free man, but realizing that I really wasn't, because I got found guilty of all the rest of the counts. The fact that a jury turned a blind eye to that and felt that it was more important for them to go home because they were sequestered for 3 days and they didn't want to be sequestered over the weekend, that my life did not matter more than that time that they had to wait until they could make a real decision.
So, in theory, the killers of Albert Ward are technically still roaming the streets.
Either roaming the streets or dead themselves. But one thing that they're not was convicted of the right crime. I started on Rikers Island. I was taken from Rikers Island to Queens House. I was brought back from Queens House to Brooklyn House. I went back to Rikers Island, back to, I believe, Queens House from there, came back to Rikers Island, was sent upstate, went to Downstate Correctional Facility. I was in some ways abused and sent up out of there, and went to Green Haven Correctional Facility in 9 days on an emergency transfer out, mainly because of my case, the fact that everybody thought I was a cop killer. And from Green Haven, I stayed there for 5 years. I went to the box. I went to Southport Correctional Facility. From Southport Correctional Facility, I got a reversal because I didn't belong in the box. I ended up coming down to Sing Sing and ended up spending 15 years here until I was released. I was already a seasoned warrior in this war. I had already had about 12 years in, and so it didn't matter where you set me. I'm gonna be good. Like, this is the life. This is what I gotta do. I have no choice. Survival is the only thing that stands in between me and my freedom. And so you end up getting this sense of where it's like, there's no more fear. There's like, I don't know, it becomes normalized. And in order for that to take place, it means that I had to become desensitized, right? And so I would say that by the time I was coming to Sing Sing, I was starting to really lose grips with my humanity. For many years, I found myself sitting on a bench just like this, and when I used to get really stressed out and like really feel like I'm losing grip on my reality, I used to come out here and I just used to look on the other side of that water. I know that my mother lives on the other side of that water, and I knew that she had gone down to the end of that water to look at this prison. And so for me to be able to finally be in a place where I can look on the other side, knowing that she was there looking for me, I was able to come over here and find peace by looking for her and realizing that my objective throughout all of these years of fighting for justice is just to cross this body of water that stands between us. And that the only thing that's standing between us are these barbed wire fences and that water, which can be somewhat intimidating. But the reality is, my path wasn't through this gate or through the water. I wasn't gonna cross on a boat. I had to cross through the legal system. And so I had to get this legal system to find a way to release me and to give me back what was taken from me, which essentially was my identity and my dignity. I had 2 sons out there. I left them at 3 years old and 5 weeks. They're now 30 and 27 years old. I left my mother at the age of 21, just turning 22. I came back to her, and I'm a grown man at 45, turning 46, to see how much time passed and the deterioration that occurred in our family throughout that time. It's kind of like looking at some of these gardens that are destroyed after, you know, the summer and the spring come, the fall comes and just destroys it all and everything looks dead. For a long time, there were times where I felt kind of dead, even though I was alive. And it was only the idea of being able to return to my mother and my children that was able to keep me alive through that. In addition to that, I can say that based on, you know, channels like this, you know, where media got involved in my story, the world started to gravitate to me and try to help hold me up and support me through all of those endeavors. But there are definitely times where it was just like, survive for what? Like, what is it that I have to do?
He was kidnapped and taken from us.
JJ's wrongful conviction attracted the attention of the media as well as celebrities. One reporter in particular championed his cause. NBC reporter Dan Slepian began to chronicle JJ's case for Dateline and eventually a podcast, which gained further attention. But Dan and JJ formed a bond, and between 2002 to present day, they helped bring attention to other wrongfully convicted people who were behind bars in New York's prison system. Many of those other wrongfully convicted were released before JJ, but each time someone got out, it gave JJ hope.
The reality is, I met Dan Slepian, who at the time was a journalist from NBC who worked for Dateline. I met him in 2002, and I was fortunate enough to meet him through a friend of mine who was also wrongfully convicted. His name is David Lemus. He was charged with the Palladium murder, and so when I met him, he had already been in the newspaper, fighting his wrongful conviction, and then I met the man. And when I looked in his eyes, I saw my future. And when he looked in my eyes, he saw his past. And so that became an unbreakable bond that still exists to this day. And through David, I met Dan. And then while I was fighting for myself, I met Eric Glisson, who was wrongfully convicted, had a situation that I felt like if he had the right momentum and a little bit of a voice, he can get out now, right? And so I'm like, Dan, here's another one. Forget about me for now. Let's get this one. And then that was successful. Yet there was another one. It was Richard Rosario and Johnny Hincapie. And I was like, Dan, we got to get all of them out. And he's like, yeah, but I'm focusing on you. And I'm like, yeah, but they're ripe. Get them out, right? And so eventually got all of them out. And then they came back for me. And every single one of them came back to visit me and support me financially and in whatever other way that they possibly could. And so a brotherhood developed. And it was like this game of human dominoes where it was like, we realized that there was a light that was being shined upon this issue. And so we needed to figure out who were the right individuals that fit the magnitude of the light. So through these stories, we've been able to continue breaking down the door a little bit more and hoping that eventually the door will be broken down enough so that the flood can come through. Because what we know right now is that there are hundreds of thousands of wrongfully convicted people while we're having this discussion.
So as the commissioner, I oversee currently we have 44 prisons across New York State with 33,600 incarcerated people, as well as an additional 17,500 individuals on community supervision or parole, as well as about 23,000 employees, over 5,000 volunteers that work within the system. So I oversee the day-to-day operations of the agency, interacting with the incarcerated population.
My number was 00A2303, and it's sad that I can remember that because it was branded in me as my identity, as opposed to the person that I was born to be.
For you now to begin to reclaim your identity, what is that like? What is that like to become JJ again?
So you're asking a 3-year-old essentially to explain what life is like for that individual. And that's kind of what it is. Like, I'm just coming into my bearings. I'm just coming into what it is to be an adult in this world, because when I was taken away, I was a child. Essentially, I was kidnapped. I thought I was an adult. I had 2 children that I wasn't ready to bring into this world. But the sadder part is that the system didn't give me the opportunity to come into this world as a man. The system didn't give me an opportunity to come into this world and be a father to those 2 children that I brought into this world. And the system hasn't given them an opportunity to have a father present in his life. And those implications have created a lot of other situations that have devastated my children, that have devastated me, that have devastated my mother.
That's the unfortunate part of our justice system, right? It's wrong, and they got it wrong. And unfortunately, JJ, it cost him 24 years of his life of being in here. And I've gotten to know JJ, I gotten to know JJ's family over time, and you know, the one thing, JJ continued to fight. He always held his innocence, he continued to fight, but at the same time, he leaned into the progressive programs, and he's helped countless men in the system find their path to programs, to redemption, to rehabilitation.
On August 17th, 2021, JJ Velazquez was granted clemency by then New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. On September 9th, 2021, after 23 years, 8 months, and 7 days of imprisonment, JJ Velazquez walked out of Sing Sing Correctional Facility.
The minute that big door opened up, and on the other side I could see my family, I can't recapture what that emotion was like, but at that moment, it was like the best feeling in the world, right? And since then, I've had some other feelings that have come very close. But to know that had that moment never come, none of the other ones would arise either, right? And just holding on to my mother, I remember her, she just like cried and cried. It was like so loud, but it was also like relieving. Like, I'm finally holding my mother. I'm finally don't have a prison table in between us or an officer who's gonna say, all right, that's enough. And I was able to just hold on to her. And it just felt like everything that I had endured was worth it at that point. Wow. Just to be able to have that moment to share with my moms and my 2 children. Because the entire time I was in prison, every time that I wanted to give up, the only reason why I was surviving was for that moment.
But has the state of New York ever apologized for what had happened?
No. It was really, really heart-wrenching to see how this situation ended, because after 27 years of fighting, I mean, the hardest, roughest fight of my life, with half the nation behind me, I'm released, and unfortunately, punitively sanctioned again by being placed on community supervision, and then coming and finishing that even before they could exonerate me.
I am granting the petition to set aside the verdict.
On September 30th, 2024, JJ was fully exonerated by Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg. The DA's office granted JJ Velazquez's request to vacate the conviction and move to dismiss the indictment in the interest of justice based on newly discovered DNA evidence. The motion was officially granted by Judge Abraham Klott.
That's a question that I haven't been able to answer. When I look at folds of life and how everything came together, you know, I was the son of a police officer. And so for me to lose my father and my freedom 10 months apart, and then to be accused of taking another police officer's life, that was really a hard blow for me to absorb. And then within hours, I go and I sit in front of an attorney who tells me I'm facing the death penalty. And so essentially, if this country, particularly in New York, were to sanction the death penalty, we would not be having this conversation. Even though I'm an exonerated man today, we would have never had the opportunity to exonerate JJ.
He can't get that 25 years back. You can't give it back to him. I don't have a time machine. Nobody can give it back to him. Is there a way the state of New York can make up for that?
You know, I'm so glad we saw the outcome that we did, that he's, you know, he originally got clemency and now he's been exonerated. And despite that, right, he's still leaning into this work. And I think that's a testament to his character and who he's about. And I think as a system, you know, we need to continue to highlight our mistakes. And, you know, mistakes are never good when it leads to incarceration. But if we make a mistake, we shouldn't be afraid to say we've made a mistake and that we need to do better and learn from those things. As I said in the beginning, I believe that prisons are a place that you, as punishment, not for punishment. In JJ's case, he should have never been punished in the first place.
Upon his release in 2021, JJ took part in a roundtable discussion at the White House for Now This, and spoke to President Biden about prison reform and fighting for innocent people as part of the initiative for Now This's presidential forum.
Good afternoon, President Biden. Obviously, being wrongfully convicted is one of America's worst nightmares. It certainly was for me for almost 24 years. Yet this is only one of the major flaws in our broken legal system.
President Biden apologized to JJ on, quote, behalf of all society, end quote, for his wrongful conviction.
Coming back is part of what I do. So as hard as it was to get out, and as hard as I fought to get out, I fought just as hard to get right back in, right? And so right now, you know, as the program director for the Frederick Douglass Project for Justice, we're running programs in 12 states where we bring the community into prisons. But here's a very special place for me, because here is where I founded Voices from Within with 10 other like-minded individuals that were incarcerated here doing time with me, and we wanted to change the culture of individuals inside. We wanted to redefine what it means to pay a debt to society. I sat across from President Biden within a year of my release, and he apologized to me on behalf of society and said that it's not the society that needs to give me a second chance, I need to give society a second chance, was basically what he was saying. But the reality is that, you know, there's a quote, and it's not mine. It's been attributed to several people, Muhammad Ali being one of them. But it says that service is the rent we pay for room on this earth. And so the idea of redefining what it is to pay a debt to society is that as people who are on this earth, we have a purpose. And our purpose is to pick each other up, help each other up, and try to get through this life in a way that's peaceful and human, with dignity, instead of all of this hatred and animosity that we're living through right now.
For Inside Edition Digital, I'm Sal Bono.